Welcome to Adult Sunday School here at Friendship Bible Church. Let's go to the Lord in prayer, ask His blessing for this morning's study. Welcome everyone here, welcome everyone at home. Let's pray, we'll get started after. Dear Heavenly Father, just thank you for these mornings. Thank you for the rain. We definitely needed it here, and we're thankful for all the blessings you give, and we're certainly thankful for your word. That we can come together as a group every morning on Sunday and study through the book of 2 Samuel. And I just pray that our hearts and minds will be open to what you're trying to teach us this morning through the life of David. And I just pray that you'll bless us and continue to shape us and mold us into the image of your Son, Lord, and continue to work in our hearts this morning. I pray all this in thanks. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, we're going to start with a review as usual, so we won't be in the notes yet, and then we will go and we'll get into the notes from last week. If you have last week's notes, we're going to be at the top of page 2. I will go back and read the previous verses 22 to 26. I think that is. No, I will go back and read 22 to 25, but we will be on page 2, top of page 2. And we will finish our notes. And unfortunately, Carol, I apologize ahead of time. But if we do get finished with some time left, we will have a quiz. Now, as soon as I mention quiz, everybody's heart rate goes up and people get a little anxious. The quiz is certainly for fun. There is no points off, and I will not look at you cross if you get any of them wrong. I will applaud those who get it right. There's no bonus points if you get all of them right or anything like that. So lots of times when I teach my high schoolers, of course Rach knows this, they say, well, if I win, Mr. Farmer, what do I get? And I'm like, nothing. You get a pat on the back or the congratulations from me. Isn't that a reward enough? So if you get some right on these quizzes, you're going to get a congratulation from me, but that's about all you're going to get. There is nothing. The prize is not fabulous. All right, so let's review and remember what we went over last week. So last week, we began our study by highlighting the comments of Abner to the elders of the Northern Coalition. Remember that there was a coalition in the north, and Abner goes to them, and his comments reveal some things that we wouldn't previously know, and they were important comments. What we kind of understood after these comments he made to this Northern Coalition of elders was that it was common knowledge, at least among the elders and leadership of the nation, that David was to be the next king of Israel. And that not only David was to be the next king of Israel, that he was actually chosen by Jehovah. Throughout the book of 1 Samuel, we as the readers and the studiers, we definitely understood that since Samuel anointed David in Bethlehem long before this and mentioned that Saul was rejected, we certainly understood that David was to be the next king of Israel. But I don't know if the common people really understood these things. It is not mentioned that there was a public announcement announcing David as king. So when Abner goes to the elders and reveal these things, it's pretty stark. And we understand that it definitely was common knowledge, at least among the leaders, that David would be the next king of Israel. So the question became, what portion of the Hebrew population truly understood this to be true? But either way, this was Abner's strategy when he went to them. He was going to try to talk them into making David king as soon as possible. Now, Abner reached out to David with his offer. And David agreed to make a covenant with Abner under one condition. Do you remember what that condition was? Abner was to bring David's wife, Michal, Saul's daughter, to him when he came. Abner would not see David's face unless he brought Michal with him. Now, David, through messengers, agreed. So Abner went to the northern elders, and this is where this conversation went. He said another surprising thing when appealing to these men. Abner said, Gam temol, gam shilshom. And in Hebrew, literally that means time and again yesterday and the day before. It's a figure of speech. Over and over again in the past, you were seeking for David to be king over you. That's what Abner says. Another surprising remark. Time and again, yesterday and the day before. It was their desire in time past to make David their king. Now this shows what we probably knew, that not everything was peaches and cream in Saul's kingdom. Not everyone was happy with Saul's leadership. But the other thing was David was wildly popular. He was always wildly popular. But then we read that Saul made it clear that anyone who aligns himself with David is the enemy of the state. And thus David began to run, and Saul chased him around Israel. Also, Saul's erratic behavior made people extremely nervous. They never knew what this king would do. But Abner here, now that Saul is dead, says to them that since you wanted David to be king over you before, the next line there is, now then do it. And that was his appeal to them. And that day, they made an agreement to make David king over them, even getting the Benjamite elders to agree to this course of action. This was Saul's tribe, and it was Abner's toughest sell to get these Benjamites in line. And even the Benjamite elders agreed, which was pretty amazing. So Abner took a contingent, it tells us, of 20 men and traveled down to see David at Hebron. And we're not told this, but guess who he had in tow? Obviously, he brought Michal. They met. They made a covenant. The next time these two see each other, Abner and David, Abner would have the northern tribe of elders with him to make David king over all Israel, from the expression all of Israel, from Dan all the way to the north to Beersheba all the way in the south. From Dan to Beersheba, David would be king over all Israel. But human messiness always gets in the way. Joab and a portion of David's army, if you recall, were out on a raid. Now, one has to wonder if this was purposeful to remove both Joab and Abishai away from the capital so that David could peacefully hold this meeting. And so it's a good, guess that there's a real good possibility here that David sent him away purposely. There would be no agreement with Joab and Abishai around. There might even have been bloodshed. So Joab and his raiders return with, they say, great spoil. But the celebratory atmosphere changed as soon as Joab found out that David hosted Abner while he was gone. And he says not only did he host Abner, but David let Abner leave in peace. Joab is furious and he confronts David. But he doesn't exactly, we looked at, speak the truth. He could have said that he wanted Abner dead because Abner killed his brother, or that he felt threatened by this covenant and what it meant to his position with David moving forward. He could have appealed to David, I'm your second in command. But men sometimes are not this way. Instead, he says, we read last week, and this I quote, "You know Abner the son of Ner, that he came to deceive you and to learn of your going out and coming in and to find out all that you were doing." On the human side of things, David wasn't doing Joab any favors here. But he was taking direct steps to consolidate his power so that he could rule over all Israel, just as God had promised long ago. Joab is upset. He says, listen, Abner came to spy, and he's going to go back and he's going to give Ishbosheth the lay of the land and kind of use it against you. But Joab wants Abner dead. There's a problem here. So David is consolidating his power. He's doing what he needs to do. And this brings up an important principle moving forward. In any given situation, we are responsible to do our part in making the best decisions and moves possible. The things that are under our control, they are our responsibility, and everything else God will take care of. And we talked about that. It is my duty and responsibility to prepare every single week for this lesson, for this study, and I am responsible for setting aside time to do that. I can't come in on any given Sunday and say, well, I didn't really set aside the time, but I prayed, so it should be okay. You are responsible to do the things that you are responsible for doing, and you do them. God will take care of all the rest. All the things that have to do with your weaknesses, the things that you lack, God will take care of those things. If He's called you, do what God has asked you to do, and let God take care of all those other things. God required David to do his part in taking steps to become the next king over Israel. And David decided that wasn't to kill Saul, but he was going to do other things to make sure that this transition occurred. He was doing this to make sure there was no bloodshed in this transition of power. And so David was doing his part. God was taking care of everything else. All the things David couldn't do, well, God was accomplishing the rest. These are all the circumstances that we would deem were beyond David's control. And there was a lot in this section, including the time of running from Saul. A lot of stuff out of David's control. But look what's happening. We're this close. God is this close in time in the narrative of making David king. So we're going to begin our study at the top of page 2 in our notes, and I'm going to read starting at verses 22. So if you do want to go back to page 1, you can, but I will start at the top of page 2. For those who don't have last week's notes, I think there are. Does everybody have a copy of last week's notes? Good. Yeah, I'm going to start reading 22, which is actually the bold up here, just to give us a little context, and then I'm going to go right to 26, read all the way to 30. If you're in your Bibles, I'm reading verses 22 to 30. Am I good? Let's get our bearings here in 2 Samuel 3. It says this, Joab returns from raiding, right? And behold, the servants of David and Joab came from a raid and brought much spoil with them. But Abner was not with David in Hebron, for he had sent him away, and he had gone in peace. Verse 23, when Joab and all the army that was with him arrived, they choked Joab, saying, Abner the son of Ner came to the king, and he has sent him away, and he has gone in peace. Then Joab came to the king and said, what have you done? Behold, Abner came to you. Why then have you sent him away? And he is already gone. You know Abner, the son of Ner, that he came to deceive you and to learn of your going out and coming in and to find out that all that you were doing. And of course, that is all we're given, with this confrontation between Joab and David. Of course, we understand that Joab storms away, unsatisfied and angry. Now let's find out what happens. Of course, we know Joab murders Abner. And let's look at that in verses 26 through 30, top of page 2. I'm going to read the bold right there, Joan. Top of page 2. When Joab came out from David, when this meeting was over, Joab, sent messengers after Abner, and they brought him back from the well of Sirah. But David did not know it. That's important. So when Abner returned to Hebron, Joab took him aside in the middle of the gate to speak to him privately, and there he struck him in the belly, so that he died on account of the blood of Asahel his brother. Afterward, when David heard it, he said, I and my kingdom are innocent before the Lord forever of the blood of Abner the son of Ner. May it fall on the head of Joab and on all his father's household, and may there not fail from the house of Joab one who has a discharge, or who is a leper, or takes hold of a distaff, or who falls by the sword, or who lacks bread. Verse 30. So Joab and Abishai, his brother, killed Abner, because he had put their brother Asahel to death in the battle at Gibeon. Now Joab, after this meeting, sent his own messengers, not David's, his own, after Abner to track him down and bring him back. Now the message must have been some sort of lie, telling Abner that David needed him to come back to Hebron for one reason or another. Matter of fact, maybe this message included that when you get back, see Joab. So Abner would have been expected Joab to meet him at the gate and expected this little meeting because it supposedly came from David. Now Joab's messengers caught up to him by the well of Sarai. And the historians like Josephus say that this well is about a mile north of Hebron. And there's other commentators and historians say a couple miles. But there is a point here. Abner hadn't gotten far. He was not that far away by the time these messengers caught up with him. Of course, they bring him back. He meets Joab at the gate, and Joab brings him to the side for a secret meeting, and he kills Abner, stabbing him underneath the fifth rib, which is a military cut here. This is a military attack. All soldiers knew where to stick this knife or the sword, and he kills Abner in the same place that Abner struck Asahel, his brother, underneath the fifth rib. Of course, this is a death blow. You might die right away, but you will bleed out. There is no recovery. So last week when we ended, we started talking about the avenger of blood and what the Torah, the Old Testament law, says about Abner's killing of Asahel compared with Joab's killing of Abner, and we kind of went over these things. Last week, we talked about when one soldier kills another soldier in battle. And I wanted to preface the conversation we had last week to say, there are many people in your own families, grandparents, great-grandparents, who are in wars. And they've had to kill another human being in those wars. All right? And war is ugly and war is messy. And I had talked about how the original intention of God was not that wars would occur. But in his permissive will, he has permitted at this time lots of things to occur in this world. And death in battle is a necessary evil that has been allowed. So originally, it's not God's intention for any human being to strike down another human being because of sinfulness, because of the fall, this fallen world. It has been permitted. But we would all agree that death on the battlefield is not murder. When one soldier kills another defending his country on the battlefield, that person did not murder another. And therefore, death on the battlefield is justified. And because I use the word justified, I'm very careful to use that word. It's justified in a sense that does not leak into the category of murder. And the only thing I said here is the exception of war crimes. There are murders that occur in the context of war and battles that are unnecessary. They're called war crimes. So I'm not including that. I'm saying one person kills or defends himself on the battlefield against another. It's not murder. And the same thing in ancient Israel. It's not murder. It's a justifiable killing. Secondly, the laws concerning the avenger of blood and sanctuary cities, we'll go over that in a second, were meant to deal with accidental killing and even negligent killing, something we call nowadays manslaughter, and we're all kind of aware of that. I go out in the road, I make a mistake, God forbid, I'm not saying this lightly, I swerve into another lane and kill a family member or a family. It was accidental. It's driver error. Of course, that doesn't include if I was drunk driving. That's murder. But things happen. Accidents happen. So what happens in ancient Israel is one human being was not to kill any other human being. But God took into account human messiness, and so that was going to happen. If I accidentally killed Mary, all right, and Mary's brother is going to come after me. That is the avenger of blood. Stipulated in the law, there were 6 sanctuary cities. I would hightail it and run to one of the sanctuary cities. I would be protected by the elders of that city, and the avenger of blood, Mary's brother, would not be allowed to come in and kill me. When it was established that I did it by accident, then I was to remain in that sanctuary city under their protection. The avenger of blood, Mary's brother, would not be allowed to enter the city and kill me, or it would be a murder on him. That's this idea of sanctuary cities and avengers of blood. It's because humans are so messy, the Lord, again, allowed this for protection. So this is different. Now, if it was determined in the sanctuary city that I premeditated murder, and it was a premeditated murder, right? And this was something that I did in a heat of passion, then the elders of that city would execute me. So sanctuary cities and the avenger of blood, if you ever read that in the Old Testament, is not meant to protect murderers. Murderers were to be executed. But it was to protect those who committed these accidental killings, where it was determined that it was an accident or manslaughter. That's what that is. So if a murderer, at the end of this second to last paragraph, if a murderer went to a sanctuary city, then it was determined that he committed premeditated murder, he was to be executed immediately. That's how this worked in the Torah. The point I am making is this, and I hope you get it. Abner's killing of Asahel was justified in the context of battle and was a matter of self-defense. Joab's killing of Abner was cold-blooded murder. It was underhanded and treacherous, and it certainly did not fall under the avenger of blood category. Now, because we know how people are, Joab might have told himself, and he might have told his brother, and he might have told all those who heard that he was the avenger of blood for his family. But according to the Torah law, he did not qualify. Joab is a murderer. He is not the avenger of blood. He does not qualify under Torah law. Very important. There is a difference between these two killings. Two people end up dead. Abner was justified. Even if we dislike him as a character, Joab was not. Now we understand this when David hears of it. He condemns Joab's actions right away. That's why David is upset. Besides the fact that politically, Joab just created a whole big problem for David, and we're going to talk about that. But David hears of it, he condemns Joab right away because of the moral problem here, because of the violation of Torah law, and the fact that he's David's second in command. He makes a statement before his court and advisors that we've read that he was innocent before the Lord, and he had nothing to do with Abner's murder. All earthly and heavenly consequences should fall on Joab and his family. Joab was under the curse of what we call the curse of blood guilt. And David asked the Lord to follow through with that judgment. So what Joab did was wrong. But David is very emphatic here. It's pretty surprising what David says. David says, if you remember, may there always be someone from Joab's family, basically, who suffers from a discharge. Now, a sexual discharge, to try to make this as PG-13 as possible, was an important thing. We see that in the life of Uriah the Hittite, who refused to go home to his wife while his fellow brothers were fighting on the battlefield. And we have that whole problem with Bathsheba. And one of the reasons we saw that is because if you have sexual relations with your wife, there's nothing wrong with that. The discharge and the exchange of bodily fluids renders a Hebrew, an Israelite, unclean ritually. And you kind of tried not to go into battle unclean ritually. And so that was a problem. We also see it, remember, when David goes to Ahimelech and asks for the bread, consecrated bread, and he said, "Is your men kept yourself pure?" That's what he meant. You really shouldn't have this bread if you're ritually unclean. Okay? So that's important. So a discharge is not that. This discharge is called in Hebrew zuv. Zuv. And so this is much more than that. Zuv is a medical condition of a male's sexual organs which renders him ritually unclean. That's what he's saying should happen to Joab and his family. There's got to be somebody who suffers from a discharge. And we also know that on the female side of this, they can suffer from a discharge. Can anybody tell me from the Gospels a woman who suffered from a blood discharge? Do you remember? Right. And she touched the hem of the Lord's garment. See, the problem with the woman wasn't any pain she might have suffered, the discomfort. Oh, she had to do a lot more wash. I mean, she was doing a lot of laundry, that woman. The problem was that her discharge, her bloody discharge, rendered her ritually unclean all the time, 100% of the time. See, she was an outcast. She couldn't fellowship with other Hebrews because she was ritually unclean. So that's a discharge we see in the Gospels. This is a problem. So he says, may somebody from Joab's family suffer from a discharge, Zuv, or who is a leper. And of course, the most popular rendering of Zara'at is leprosy. But Zara'at is not just leprosy. Zara'at is any nasty, debilitating skin disease or severe rash. And so we have something called maybe psoriasis, right? Eczema. We have all kinds of skin issues. And so what David is saying is, may somebody in his family suffer, not just as a leper, but with Zara'at, is any rash or any nasty, debilitating skin disease that would render that person ritually unclean, or who takes hold of a distaff. And again, there's a lot of discussion and a little bit of disagreement on this phrase, but basically, a person who is crippled and walks with a cane. And he also says, may there's somebody from Joab's family who falls by the sword, dies in battle, or who lacks bread. And so we see David's deadly serious about this curse of blood guilt. And may that fall on Joab and his family for his sins. Now, verse 30 became a very important verse that the Holy Spirit and the human author added to hammer home the difference between the killing of these two men. See, I think there's the ability to read verse 30 50 times, 100 times, and never see what the Holy Spirit and the author is saying here. He is saying something really vitally important in the language, embedded in the language, that you could just gloss right over. See, it seems that this verse was just a repeat of facts we already know. In other words, we could tell the author, duh, we already know this. Well, that's okay. He's just summarizing the facts of the case. But that's actually not exactly what he's doing. He is obviously doing that, but he's doing much more in the language. It's not just or simply a repeat of facts already established. It says, let me read it again, verse 30. So Joab and Abishai, his brother, killed Abner because he had put their brother Asahel to death in the battle of Gibeon. So let me explain why this is important. First, the implication for the first time was that Abishai was complicit in his brother's action. He was part of the plot to kill Abner. We don't get that yet. So we find out in verse 30, it was Joab, but his brother was helping him out, and he was involved. And so it's both Joab and Abishai, or it's both brothers of Asahel. Second, in Hebrew it says, Joab and Abishai, his brother, killed Abner. And that is the Hebrew word harag. Now, the word harag means an unjustified killing or murder. As a matter of fact, if I'm a translator, I would have wrote Joab and Abishai, his brother, murdered Abner. The very extreme form or version of harag. It's unjustified killing. But he continues, it says, Abner put their brother Asahel to death. That is moot. Now, we would say muth, so I'll use the English because TH in Hebrew, it's just a T sound. Moot, muth. All right, so muth. Now, in most contexts, muth means to die. Right? So it's not murder, it's just to die. Genesis 2:17 says, and we know this verse, dying, thou shalt die, right? You will surely die at the end of that verse. But we've always heard there's two dies here in this verse because the original Greek says muth tamuth, or muth, or die. So if I was to render that very, very literally, it said, the day that you eat from it, that's the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, die. I mean, it's very emphatic there. There's two deaths there, die. When you eat, you die spiritually, separated from God because of your disobedience by eating that fruit. You die first spiritually. Then when Adam and Eve died spiritually, then they're going to now die physically, which they originally weren't created to have a physical death. They would have continued on. There was no death. But dying, thou shalt die. Here they ate of it. They died spiritually. Then they died physically. They die. Moot, moot. So in this context, it means to cause to die. It's not moral or legally. It's not moral or legally. It's innocent of any wrongdoing. It's morally and legally innocent of wrongdoing. It's not that to cause to die is something that is the same as murder. It's totally different. And to leave no doubt, the author adds that Asahel's death was in the context of battle. So one killing was justified while the other was murder. So it says, if I was to say that again, Joab and Abishai, his brother, murdered Abner, while Abner put their brother Asahel to death in the context of battle, or justifiably put Asahel to death in the context of battle. That's how you would, give an expanded translation here. So one killing was justified while other was murder. This event also provides one example of the weaknesses of David's leadership as king. And I do want to go on with that, but I want to say, does anybody have any questions about what I just went over? Any redirects or clarification? The author, the Holy Spirit, and the human author is telling us that there's a problem here, and what Joab and Abishai did was underhanded, cold-blooded murder, and it's going to cause a problem for David. I want to see that. But I think that this event also shows an example of one of David's weaknesses as a leader, as king. Now, whenever we deal with our Bible characters, we deal humbly, right? We are pointing out their weaknesses so that we learn from them. We're not pointing out their weaknesses so that we can feel better about ourselves. So when I say that we're pointing out David's weaknesses in his leadership, I want you to note what it is and then decide how you are going to avoid such pitfalls. We learn from David's mistakes. We don't gloat that, oh, thank you, Lord, you didn't make me like David in this aspect. I'm much stronger than that, right? So I say it humbly. We're going to look at one of David's weaknesses. He verbally condemned the actions of his nephew and top commander Joab. He even cursed the two of them. Whether you disagree or agree with David's words, he sends a curse out that the Lord brings about punishment on Joab and his family. But he seemed to be unwilling to deal with some of his family head on. Joab and Abishai should have been disciplined. They should have been disciplined. They murdered another human being. Joab probably should have been removed from his position. So your teacher is teaching, and I'm going to say it, that I believe that David should have removed Joab from his position. Joab should not be second in command right now. Instead, David privately and publicly spoke out against the actions of Joab and Abishai, yet did nothing to punish them. He didn't lift a finger. He will treat his sons in the same manner, which causes him more headaches in the future. So when we get to that and we see of their rebellion and how he let them go and do some things they shouldn't have, didn't keep them in line, and we're going to see a little bit of weaknesses in David's character here. Now, we should understand that some of those problems was the Lord allowed it to happen. All right, but some of it was David had a responsibility, and of course he didn't hold up his part of that responsibility. And so we'll see that. So David does this with his sons. He's doing this with Joab and Abishai now. He's not dealing with it head on. So we're going to discuss this in the future. Any questions about that? That'll be a discussion a little bit more in detail when we get to those things. Pastor George.
Okay, when Abner comes to Hebron, right? That's where he gets killed, right? Hebron is a sanctuary city. So that's, he actually was in the sanctuary city when he was murdered by Joab. If it had been outside the city, would that have been a case of blood guilt?
No, the killing itself was unjustified altogether. It was murder.
Right.
There was no justification at any point in time.
Well, isn't that the reason why you run to a city of refuge? Because outside the city, you might be killed by one of the relatives.
Right. But there was no avenger of blood that we know of from Abner's family.
Okay.
And we don't know of anybody that stepped forward to challenge Joab. Probably because of Joab's power, because he was second in command. We forget, Joab was a scary guy. He was second in command to the king, the commander of the Lord's army, the commander of David's army. You probably didn't mess with him. But if somebody from Abner's family would have tried to avenge Abner, then Joab would have had to run to or be in Hebron. But the problem is that there should have been a trial. And of course, Joab should have been found guilty and then executed. So either way, he should have been either executed or he definitely should have been removed from his position. This is a very, very, very tricky time for David. Sometimes we have a hard time being critical. Sometimes we're very critical of our Bible characters. But we're going to talk about what a sticky situation this is that David's in. If we go by the book, Joab, and especially Joab, should have been executed, shouldn't he have? According to the law. He murdered another human being. They're not allowed to murder. The whole Noahic covenant, when Noah go off, the God said, you're not allowed to spill men's blood on the earth. You shall not murder. So there's no doubt that David should have handled this differently. And Joab should have been executed in some way. Politically, he probably couldn't afford that. And we're going to talk about that. At the very end, David even admits as much, doesn't he? You remember the very end of this chapter? We're going to get to that. All right, any other comments? Let's read verses. Let's finish this chapter. We'll see if we can finish it. I want to get to my quiz, but we'll see. Okay, so now I put in this section political win because I think it's really good. I like to paint a picture for you guys. I'm trying to be the best artist I can be. And I'm trying to paint a picture. And I want to show you the political situation. In verses 31 through 39, David has a monumental political win. And we're going to discuss that. This is what it says, verse 31. We read these 9 verses. Then David said to Joab and all the people who were with them, this is after Abner's death, tear your clothes, gird on sackcloth, and lament before Abner. So Joab and Abishai were going to have to swallow some pride here. And King David walked behind the bier.
Where are you here?
We're at the bottom of page 3.
Oh, here?
So David walked behind the bier. Thus they buried Abner in Hebron, and the king lifted up his voice and wept at the grave of Abner, and all the people wept. The king chanted a lament for Abner and said, should Abner die as a fool dies? Your hands were not bound, nor your feet put in fetters. As one falls before the wicked, you have fallen. I think David made his feelings known right there. It was an underhanded death, not deserving of a warrior of Abner's stature. And all the people wept over him. Then all the people came to persuade David to eat bread while it was still day. But David vowed, saying, may God do so to me, and more also, if I taste bread or anything else before the sun goes down. Now, this is important. Now, all the people took note of it, and it pleased them, just as everything the king did pleased all the people. So all the people and all Israel understood that day that it had not been the will of the king to put Abner the son of Ner to death. Then the king said to his servants, do you not know that a prince and a great man has fallen this day in Israel? And here's our verse. I am weak today, though anointed king, the most powerful man in the land. And these men, the sons of Zeruiah, who are they? Who's the sons of Zeruiah? Joab and Abishai. Joab and Abishai. Zeruiah is his sister. These are his nephews. And these men, the sons of Zeruiah, are too difficult for me. May the Lord repay the evildoer according to his evil. Chapter ends. Now, on the surface, what happens at the end of the chapter doesn't really seem important, but it is. I believe David is facing a political crisis that, if handled wrong, could have ruined his chance of consolidating power over all Israel. David handles the situation of Abner's death almost flawlessly, but I don't think he was handling it or being fake in any way, and I'm sure some people disagree. I think all of this behavior, instead of being a calculated series of political moves, flowed from his fellowship with God and a genuine concern that Israel properly honor Abner and see his death as a tragedy. And I think David was genuinely concerned and upset over what had happened in his kingdom. And some may disagree. This is what I believe. I don't think that some political advisor sat down with David. So, you know, David, you're in a very precarious situation here. If you want the northern tribes to follow you, you must do A, B, C, D, F, G, lament, throw ashes in your hair, put on sackcloth, order the men to do this. You better do this. You better walk behind the bier. And if you do that, you got him. I don't think that conversation occurred. I think everything that David did flowed from his fellowship with the Lord. He does, at least according to the people, all the things a sincere man would do under the circumstances, so they took David as sincere when they saw how he acted and behaved, all revolving around the burial of Abner. The king begins these sincere behaviors by ordering a lament for all of his advisors in his court. And so they're all to put on sackcloth, like us putting on black nowadays and going to a funeral. They don sackcloth, specific clothes. They threw ashes on their head. They know in the typical Middle Eastern time period, they wailed, they moaned, they lamented. This is very loud. You know, Jesus was going to a house one time where there was professional lamenters out front. You remember that story? And David said, she's not dead. She's just sleeping. And they said, they laughed at our Lord. Because they were in the middle of, And Jesus said, the person's not dead. And then they're like, and they went from, yeah, right, laughing at the Lord. So you had him removed. So they lamented. So I picture the king ordering a lament. People are crying. They're wearing their lamenting clothes. They're wailing. And then it says that David walked behind a bier. Now, a bier, or you could say it a couple different ways. I'm going to say it like beer, not the drink, beer. Okay, a bier was a flat raised platform used to march a corpse through to a burial site. We've seen this. In the Middle Ages, they did this a lot. Remember when a king died, they put him on a platform. He has flowers and a floral arrangement, and they walk him and march him through the city. Any great man of power will march through the city in what is called a bier. And you march into the grave site. Well, kings did not normally walk behind these biers. That was a sign of submission and honoring the person on the bier. This was reserved for only members of the royal family. If one of David's family died, one of his sons per se, he would walk behind the bier. You didn't walk, if you're a king, you don't walk behind the bier. The king doesn't. Others might. Only the royal family got this treatment. David was showing Abner the optimum amount of respect by doing something kings usually wouldn't do for non-family members. He openly wept over Abner's grave. Remember, this was loud. This wasn't, somebody saw David shed a tear and, you know, they saw that tear go down and like they zoomed the camera in on David's face and then they were like, oh, the king is crying. David openly wailed over the grave of Abner. David wrote, as David does, the psalmist, David the writer, the poet king, wrote and chanted a lament for Abner just as he did for Saul and Jonathan. So he did this for Abner as well. The lament details the fact that Abner's death, we saw that, was a needless waste, undeserving a man of his station and one who did so much for his people. David fasted all day, and they tried to get him to eat, but he refused to eat. Even when his advisors encouraged him to take a little food for strength, he would not eat. Now we're going to see in chapter 16 specifically that not everyone bought this behavior of David. We're going to have some detractors of David, and I'm going to talk to you at the time we get to chapter 16, and a guy named Shimei from the tribe, of course you would guess it, Benjamin, had a lot to say with David when he was leaving the capital city of Jerusalem. So not everybody specifically in the north, or really specifically in the tribe of Benjamin, believed all of this. There was possibly some detractors. There were some mostly from the tribe of Benjamin, probably who weren't convinced. And they thought he was conniving here. They accused David of blood guilt and claimed that the rebellion of his son Absalom at the time was a direct judgment by Jehovah. David was getting judged. But verse 36 makes it clear that most of the people were pleased with David's actions and displays of mourning. They took it as genuine, and whatever rumors began to swirl were halted. Now, I say, what rumors? Well, let's talk about this for a second. Let me set the stage here. Why is this a very sticky political situation for David? What is the problem here? Just pretend we're a bunch of Benjamites. No, we're a bunch of Judeans who live with the king in the capital city of Hebron. And we're talking about this whole thing that happens. What am I going to say to you? Listen, people, listen. This was brilliant. You see what David did? He invited Abner to the capital city. He pretended he made a covenant with him, right? And he had this whole plot and plan. And then he lured him back to the city. So what? And he ordered Joab to kill Abner. Brilliant. And now he's wiping his hands clean of it all. Man, King David is conniving, but boy, smart. Good job. Now we got the king. Now now Abner's out of the way. I mean, you see it? I would say to you, listen, come on, you guys are smart. Joab would never do anything without David's say-so. There's no way that Joab kills Abner. No way, I say, without David's go-ahead. David can't admit that he sent Joab after Abner. He can't admit it politically. So he did it in the best way possible. Wow. That's what I would convince you. If I'm a Judean, I would convince you. See how easy it is? The people from the north, the people from the south, the people who are close to David, they probably would have automatically thought that David had to have ordered Joab killing Abner, because there's no way Joab would have done that without David's say-so. This is a political nightmare, because if you have all the people in the north who were this close to making a treaty with David, now they're like, uh-oh, are we in danger now? Is he going to kill us? I mean, we got a real political situation here. So it's a problem. But he adds to this. The author tells us that just about everything David did at this point in time pleased the people. They loved David, and you get the sense that the Lord was bringing David back full circle to the time when he was out in battle, you remember, with the Philistines, and everything David did was great. They loved him. He was successful in every battle. Right. David killed his 10,000, Saul his thousands, right? They loved David. And David's getting to that point again. And this is the Lord's doing. We see the Lord bringing David back full circle. And he continually won during that time, and the people loved him. So even though he was in a sticky political situation where most of the people in the beginning probably were like, uh-oh, David had him offed using Joab, right? David had Abner murdered. It's a definite fact, right? And they would think that. But the author summarized what happens when they start to see the king's behavior and they look at everything. Verse 37 is a clear summary. It says, so all the people and all Israel, including those northern elders, understood that day that it had not been the will of the king to put Abner the son of Ner to death. These sentences mean something. These verses are important. So if you're generally thinking, well, how would David get out of this situation? Then the author just made it clear that no worries, this is really what happened. All the people understood, looking at David, and they saw that he was genuine, and they believed he was sincere, and it pleased them. And they understood. They started to believe. Even if they started to believe that David had something to do with Abner's death, now after all these things and after the whole burial of Abner, they all believed David was innocent. David had nothing to do with it. Even though we say David will have a few detractors, his behavior convinced the population, and especially the northern elders, that's the idea, that David had nothing to do with the murder of Abner. Thus, David avoided a political nightmare and an irreversible scandal. The Lord was with David. So, again, let me wrap it up in summary. Abner leaves the capital city, and David was within weeks of becoming king over all the tribes. Weeks. Abner was just going to go back, said, all right, we have an agreement with David. You're going to come back with me at so-so time. We're going to go back to the capital city. We're going to make an agreement. David's king over all Israel. And then Joab murders Abner. And now we have this political crisis and nightmare. And everybody's going to think that David had something to do with it. And the northern elders are going to pull back. Right? And then the funeral occurs, and David acts as what I consider genuine. Right? He honors Abner, and the people, and including the north, see and realize, well, David had nothing to do with this man's death. There's no way. And this is God's work. You see, the Lord is working in all this. David was just being genuine to me. But the Lord was going to move forward with his plan. Pop.
I would say that the because there was detractors, as you pointed out, that if David followed through and followed the law and executed Abner, Joab, and Abishai, that would have convinced there would have been no detractors.
That's a great point, Pop. Yes.
And because when it came to his family, he just didn't have that same view. He always capitulated. He always compromised.
Right.
He wouldn't have had the problem with Absalom if he hadn't take the rape of Sirius and brought his son to justice.
Right.
And for rape would have been would have been capital punishment, and you certainly could see if we put ourselves in his shoes, we would find a way of not executing judgment because it's family, it's a son or a daughter, or and it would be hard to stand up and say, well, my son is guilty, so let's execute him. I mean, it's going to take a pretty strong person to have that follow through, following the law, and he's the king and he's responsible. So he sets precedent by his, as you say, his Achilles heel, his weakness. When it came to family, when they violated the law, he seems to have turned a blind eye to it. And he might discipline Absalom. I won't talk to you for a while, and you stay in your. But it's simply
right.
That's your Achilles heel. That's the weakness. And here is someone. When you have a soldier, and they've been for 10 years fighting together, you build a bond that is pretty strong. And I'm sure that Joab, in the heat of battle, was by the king's side. They fought
Valiant
together.
warrior, probably.
They fought together. They ate together.
Yeah.
They just spent this, and they protected each other. And now all of a sudden, you're a king with authority and responsibility. And what are you going to do? Well, the right thing to do, the lawful thing to do, the moral thing to do was to say, you crossed the line. And as a result, you forfeit your life because you murdered and you violated the law.
Right.
And so it saddens me to have to execute you, but he
Right.
didn't do that. So
Right.
now there is this concept of, well, this was a political ploy. It wasn't sincerity.
Right.
All that would have been ended with
That execution. You're
justice.
absolutely
Yep,
right.
It would have been done. And so all of the angst comes, and because we do the wrong thing, there's going to be repercussions.
Very valid point. And the greater point is, yes, if he would have executed those two, then there probably wouldn't have been those questions and need for all of that, right? So very good. Thank you, Pop. That's a great point.
I think also there's a chain of command here issues. When you're in an administration, you're supposed to do the will of that person that you're committed to, or you leave the position. David's the king. Would David have given Joab permission to go kill Abner, especially after they just had negotiations? He would never have done that, right?
Right.
But in Joab's mind, he's thinking he's doing David a favor because he doesn't really trust Abner or the Ishbosheth or all the people up there in the north. I'm going to take this guy out because he's just trying to take advantage of David.
Right.
And in his sense of loyalty, he thinks he's doing something for David that David really doesn't want to approve or sanction or say, go ahead and do this. He's actually, and the same thing's going to happen with Absalom, right? When the king expressly said, do not kill Absalom, Joab's the one who does,
Yeah.
right? So like we see this coming out from under authority and doing everything what you think is helping the person that you're committed to, and it's you're gone rogue. You're off the plantation. You're not doing David's will. You're doing your own will.
Yes,
right.
that's right.
And that's why in administrations, one of the most important things in administrations, presidents, governors, whatever, is to have the confidence of the people that are in your administration, that they're not going to do their own will, but they're going to actually do your will.
Right.
So David was unwilling to. He said bad things about Joab, but he didn't take him into custody and deliver justice
Right.
that the nation really needed him to do.
Right. But I just want to at least add a caveat to that about Joab. So Joab was a valiant warrior, probably did amazing things in battle. Probably Joab's the kind of guy that you would have wanted to be in battle with, and you would have admired this man, definitely. But anytime Joab's position was threatened, he murdered. That's the only problem with the Joab thing. If you held him as trying to just protect David, this is a problem I have. When David was going to promote somebody else that was going to threaten Joab's position in the future, we're going to talk about it, he murdered that man. Joab, I'm sorry, feels threatened. If Abner is excused, how's that going to affect Joab's position as second in command? Where would Abner be placed? And don't you see that as a threat to Abner's position? To Joab's position? Wouldn't Joab feel threatened about that? So I'm not necessarily sure that he was doing it just there for the protection of David. I think he murdered Abner because the second part of that was his position was threatened, and he could not allow Abner to make a peace treaty with David in the south. So, I think I think Joab is self-serving at times, and he proves it in the future by some of his actions. But we'll talk about Joab. He's going to be a very interesting character study because he has both good and bad, just like all human beings do, right? Valiant at times. We admire him for so many things that he did for David in battle. If we saw him and met him, we probably would love him. But he did so many other things that were wrong, and it became a problem. So, Pop, let's
Annabelle one time asked me when we looked at the mighty men of David, and we have a list of all these men who fought valiantly for Israel and for David. Joab's name is not on the list. He's not even the first one on the list. He's not on the list at all. And she said, well, why is that? He was such a great. Here's the reason why. He's not on that list because of this incident, and because he murdered Abner, and he then lost his status as an honorable soldier, and that's the tragedy.
He commits another murder later. He rebels against the king, and he goes along with one of his sons No quiz this week. I got the questions right here. Maybe we'll start next week with a short quiz. You guys talk too much. No, I talk too much. Good. I hope it's a good study is a blessing. It is very interesting to see all these political things that's going on and the human things. I mean, you use the word political, but it's human things. People are so human. You know, it's ancient Israel, but they act so much like us. And we can put it in today's, it doesn't matter whether it's 2025 America, in American military, in American circumstances, or we're back in ancient Israel. Aren't humans still humans dealing with the same sin, making the same decisions, under the same circumstances, even though they're a little bit different? Well, you know, the culture is so much different now, but yet the same humans. That's just amazing. That's why we needed a Savior himself. So, any redirection or any other things I need to clarify, just let me know. Heavenly Father, just thank you for this Bible study. Thank you for the book of 2 Samuel. It's just an amazing 2 books, which were originally 1 book, that you've given us as we are able to look at this time period, to see the movement of your people, and of course, most importantly, see your action, your reaction. All this human messiness will be straightened out by the divine plan, who is like the backbone behind all these things, that'll bring David, that we're going to read next, and make him king over all Israel. Your will be done. But you're always having